Your kids don't need to come to Christmas, it's adults only, my mom said. My brother snickered. Exactly. They don't belong at the table. I just smiled. That night, I donated every gift I'd bought for his kids. At 1 a.m., my mom texted. They're crying. Where are the gifts? I coldly replied. I always knew my family wasn't perfect, but nothing prepared me for last Christmas. My name is Claire Bennett, and for most of my life, I had been the daughter who made things easy for everyone else. Early in December, my mom called with the same brisk tone she used every year, like she was coordinating a gala instead of Christmas dinner. Your kids don't need to come this year. It's adults only. She said it as if excluding my 7-year-old and 4-year-old from the only family Christmas they knew was perfectly reasonable. Before I could answer, I heard my brother Derek laughing behind her. Exactly. They don't belong at the table. I felt something in me go still. I didn't argue, I just said, all right, and hung up. Ryan walked into the bedroom carrying laundry and stopped when he saw my face. I repeated every word. He set the basket down. Then we're not going. No excuses for them. No, maybe they meant something else. Just clarity. Ryan had watched me spend years translating cruelty into misunderstandings because it was easier than admitting my own family didn't respect me. They had also spent years underestimating me. I didn't post luxury vacations, drive a flashy car, or wear expensive labels, so they assumed I was barely getting by. Derek liked calling me cheap and simple. What none of them ever asked was what I actually did. I ran an e-commerce company I had built from nothing. It had taken years, but by then it was thriving. I had never needed to prove that to them. Still, that year I wanted to surprise everyone. Derek's twins were getting limited edition Lego sets already sold out in most stores. Mom was getting a silk scarf she had once admired in a Nashville boutique before walking away because it was too expensive. Dad was getting a baseball signed by his childhood hero. Derek had spent months complaining that he couldn't afford a decent smartwatch, so I bought the exact model he wanted and had his initials engraved on the back. I had even been looking at a reliable used car for him. None of them knew. Then they told me my children didn't belong at their table. That night, Ryan followed me into the garage. I opened the trunk and looked at the wrapped gifts. We loaded everything into his car and drove across town to a local shelter. The woman at the front desk nearly cried when she saw the Lego sets. She told us about a single mother with 2 boys who probably wouldn't have anything under the tree. Give those to them, I said. For the first time since Mom's call, I felt calm. Christmas morning at home was warm and simple. The kids had snowman, pancakes, cocoa, and gifts they loved. They had no idea they had been excluded. At exactly 1 a.m., my phone buzzed. Mom's message read, "They're crying. Where are the gifts? No Merry Christmas, no hello, just entitlement." I replied, "You said it was adults only," put the phone down, and went back to my children. 2 days later, Mom called twice. I let both calls go to voicemail. Then Derek texted, "Real mature move, Claire. Hope your kids enjoyed those Lego sets meant for mine." Ryan read it and shook his head. He finally realized you were bringing the expensive stuff. That was the truth. They weren't hurt by my absence. They were hurt by the disappearance of what I provided, and the gifts were only part of it. For nearly 5 years, I had quietly sent my parents $600 every month toward their rent. Mom never directly asked. She just hinted that money was tight and the apartment cost more than expected. So I helped because I could, because I thought that was what a good daughter did. That week, I opened my banking app and canceled the recurring transfer. I didn't announce it. I simply stopped. On New Year's Eve, Mom invited Ryan and me to dinner so we could all talk. We left the kids with a sitter. Derek was already at the table, arms crossed. I let them make small talk until Mom finally asked, "So what happened this Christmas?" I stared at her. "You banned my children from a family holiday. What did you expect?" She started to explain, but I kept going. "You said it was adults only, so we stayed home. I donated the gifts. Someone else's kids had a good Christmas because of you." Derek laughed under his breath. I turned to him. You know what's funny? I was going to buy you a car. His smile disappeared. Used, reliable, clean title. You've complained for years that yours keeps breaking down. I had it lined up. All you had to do was not treat my children like they were disposable. His face went pale. Mom whispered, Claire, we didn't mean to offend you. I shook my head. You assumed I would take it. You assumed I'd show up anyway. You assumed I was too broke to matter and too desperate for your approval to leave. Ryan reached into his bag and slid a white envelope across the table. Inside was a copy of the rent statement and transfer history. That's the $600 a month Claire's been paying for almost 5 years, he said. Dad looked stunned. You paid our rent? I nodded. Part of it, quietly, because you said you were struggling. Mom blinked. You should have told us. I gave a tired laugh. Why? So you could suddenly pretend to be proud of me? No one answered. Ryan grabbed his coat. I stood beside him and told them we wouldn't be coming to Easter, Mother's Day, birthdays, or anything else for the foreseeable future. Mom called after me. You're really cutting us off over Christmas? I turned back once. No. You cut us off when you told me my children didn't belong. Then I walked outside, knowing they thought this was a fight. I already knew it was something much closer to a goodbye. For the first few days, after New Year's Eve, my phone became a revolving door of guilt. Mom called in the mornings, Dad tried in the afternoons, and Derek usually waited until late enough that I knew he'd been sitting somewhere getting angrier the longer I didn't respond. At first, their messages sounded casual, almost rehearsed. Mom left one saying, We're still your family, Claire. We shouldn't let one bad Christmas ruin everything. Derek texted, You know how Mom gets. Just let it go. Dad said almost nothing about the actual reason I had walked away. None of them mentioned my children being told they didn't belong at the table. None of them apologized to Ryan for years of treating him like an accessory to my life. And none of them acknowledged the 5 years of rent payments they had just discovered. They spoke as though I had stormed out because someone forgot my favorite dessert. Ryan eventually blocked all 3 of them on his phone. You can decide whatever relationship you want with them someday, he told me, but I'm not watching them turn you back into the person who apologizes for being hurt. I knew exactly what he meant. I had done that my whole life. After about a week of silence from me, Mom changed tactics. She sent a message so long I had to scroll several times. She admitted that maybe saying Christmas was adults only hadn't been handled perfectly, but then explained that she had simply wanted one calm holiday without children running around, and she hadn't realized I would take it so personally. I almost laughed. Take it personally? They were my children. How else was I supposed to take it? 2 hours later, another text came through. But it isn't fair to punish your father for something I said. That sentence told me more than the entire essay before it. She wasn't thinking about my kids. She was thinking about the missing $600. Ryan had become curious enough to check how quickly things were unraveling. Using an old rent statement we still had, he called the building management office with me sitting beside him. We didn't pretend to be anyone we weren't. We simply asked whether there was an outstanding balance associated with the unit, because my name had previously been connected to recurring payments. The manager wouldn't give us private details, but he did confirm that my automatic contribution was no longer being received. Ryan hung up and looked at me. What do you think they miss more? Their grandchildren or their subsidy? I didn't answer because I already knew. Derek was less subtle. One afternoon he sent me a photograph of his car with the hood open and a dead battery sitting on the pavement beside it. Guess I'm walking to work now. Thanks. A few minutes later, hope your kids don't grow up with your attitude. Then, almost 3 hours after that, sorry, that was out of line. I'm stressed. I deleted all 3 without responding. Derek had always been the golden child because he understood how to perform loyalty. He laughed at Dad's jokes, agreed with Mom's complaints, called every few days with gossip about cousins, and somehow made every family gathering feel like a room built around him. What no one talked about was how often I quietly cleaned up behind him. I had covered his share of group gifts more than once. I had paid a speeding ticket when he claimed he couldn't make rent and the calls became unbearable. I had lent him money for tires, groceries, and once an emergency dental bill he never mentioned again after the transfer cleared. Every favor had seemed too small to confront individually. Together, they formed a pattern I had somehow refused to see. In the middle of January, Dad emailed me with the subject line, "A favor." He wrote that things were temporarily tight and asked whether I could resume helping with the rent for a couple of months until everyone calmed down. I stared at that message for a long time. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of Christmas, no question about how my children were doing, just a request to restore the money. I forwarded it to Ryan. His response came immediately. "Want help answering?" I told him no. I waited 3 days because I wanted to make sure I didn't write from anger and, more importantly, that I didn't weaken halfway through. When I finally replied, I told Dad I would no longer contribute to their housing expenses. I said my financial priorities were Ryan, our children, our home, and our future. I wished him well. That was it. He never replied. 2 days later, my cousin Jen called. We hadn't spoken properly in years. She had moved away after college and was one of the few relatives who avoided the constant family politics. She asked if I was okay because she had been hearing strange things. Apparently, Mom had begun telling relatives that I had abandoned my parents after becoming successful, that money had gone to my head, and that Ryan had manipulated me into turning against everyone. That last accusation hit harder than I expected. Ryan had spent years being unfailingly polite to people who barely hid their contempt for him. He had driven Mom to appointments when I was busy, fixed Dad's laptop more times than I could remember, and once sent Mom money for an emergency dental procedure while I was traveling. Now he was the villain because blaming him was easier than admitting their own behavior had consequences. Before Jen hung up, she hesitated. "There's something else," she said. "Derek's been selling things online. A friend of mine bought a smartwatch from him last week. She mentioned there were initials engraved on it." My stomach tightened before she even finished. The watch I had bought Derek had been engraved with his initials. I immediately checked the shelter donation receipt. They had carefully logged almost everything. The Lego sets, Mom's scarf, Dad's signed baseball, several smaller gifts. No smartwatch. Then I remembered stopping at my parents' house a few days before Christmas. I had left my car unlocked in their driveway for maybe 5 minutes because I was only running inside to drop something off. The gifts had been in the trunk. I called the shelter, and the same woman who had accepted our donation checked their records again. "No watch," she confirmed. I put the phone down and felt a cold kind of anger settle over me. Ryan's reaction was much less restrained. "He stole it from your car." I didn't want to believe it, but there was only one person who could answer. I called Derek from Ryan's phone because my number was blocked on his after our latest argument. He answered on the second ring. The moment he heard my voice, he sighed like I was inconveniencing him. "Did you take the watch out of my trunk?" There was a pause, but not the shocked pause of someone falsely accused. It was the pause of someone deciding how much truth to admit. "It was just sitting there," he finally said. I gripped the edge of the kitchen counter. "You went into my car and took something that belonged to me," he scoffed. "Claire, come on. It was obviously supposed to be mine." "That doesn't make it yours." His voice hardened. "You weren't going to give it to me after all that Christmas drama anyway. So what difference does it make?" For a second, I couldn't speak. That sentence captured everything wrong with him. If he wanted something badly enough, ownership became irrelevant. My boundaries became cruelty. My refusal became theft from him. "The difference," I said quietly, "is that now I know exactly who you are." I hung up and blocked him everywhere. That night, Ryan and I opened our banking records and started adding numbers. $600 a month toward my parents' rent, Derek's emergencies, birthday gifts, holiday travel, restaurant checks that mysteriously ended up on my card. Group presents I had quietly covered. Repairs, favors, loans that were never repaid. When the total appeared on the screen, I actually stared at it in disbelief. It wasn't that the money would make or break us. My business was doing well. What hurt was realizing how much of our time, energy, and income had been poured into people who still described me as selfish. Ryan closed the laptop. "What if that money stays here from now on?" he asked. "Trips with the kids, the house, their college accounts, things we actually want." I nodded. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like shutting off a leak. By early March, Mom apparently realized texts and phone calls weren't working. A thick, cream-colored envelope arrived with her handwriting across the front. Inside were 5 handwritten pages. She began with a story about losing me in a museum when I was 9. How terrified she had been. How she had promised herself she would never let anything separate us. For a few paragraphs, I almost thought she was finally going to apologize. Then the letter turned. She called me cruel, arrogant, obsessed with money. She said Ryan had made me cold, and that I had taken happiness away from the only people who ever loved me, without conditions. There wasn't one sentence acknowledging what they had done to my children. Not one admission about the lies she was telling relatives. Not one word about Derek stealing from me. Ryan found me sitting at the kitchen table, with the pages spread out in front of me. "Anything real in there?" he asked. I shook my head. He picked up the letter, carried it to the sink, and looked back at me. I nodded. We burned it page by page until all that carefully written guilt became gray ash. A week later, the situation crossed from manipulative into surreal. I received an email from the landlord of my parents' building. He said Mom had provided my email address and told him that I was effectively handling their finances and had always managed the rent. Attached was a notice showing an unpaid balance of $1,800. He asked how I wanted to arrange payment. I read the message twice because I couldn't believe she had actually redirected a debt to me after I explicitly stopped paying it. I called him immediately and explained that I had no power of attorney, no responsibility for their lease, and no authorization to manage their finances. I told him I had voluntarily contributed money in the past and had stopped. He went quiet, then apologized and said he would correct the account. After I hung up, I sat beside Ryan on the couch for a long time. "They're not going to stop," I said. "Not while we're close enough for them to keep reaching into our lives." Saying the next words frightened me, but they also felt strangely freeing. "I want to move." Ryan turned toward me, and instead of looking shocked, he smiled. "I've been waiting for you to say that." We stayed up almost until sunrise, talking about schools, neighborhoods, commute options, and what kind of place we wanted the kids to grow up in. I didn't want to flee dramatically across the country. I simply wanted enough distance that Mom couldn't appear on our driveway. Derek couldn't drop by demanding another favor, and every unexpected knock at the door didn't make my chest tighten. For the first time, the idea of leaving didn't feel like losing my family. It felt like protecting the one I had created. Mom and Dad still believed we were in the middle of an argument that would eventually cool down. Derek probably assumed I would get tired of being angry. None of them understood that Ryan and I had already begun looking at houses. They thought I was waiting for an apology. The truth was much simpler. I was preparing to disappear from the role they had assigned me forever. We moved in June without telling anyone. No dramatic announcement, no final family meeting, no social media post designed to make sure they saw it. Ryan and I packed the house over 2 weeks, scheduled movers for a Thursday morning, and treated the whole thing like any other practical decision. By sunset, the 4 of us were 2 counties away in a neighborhood with taller trees, quieter streets, and absolutely no history attached to it. I didn't leave my parents a forwarding address. The only relative who knew where we had gone was Jen, and she promised she wouldn't tell anyone. That first night, we ate takeout on the living room floor because most of our dishes were still buried in boxes. The kids argued over which bedrooms they wanted. Ryan opened a bottle of wine, and I realized I had checked the driveway only once all evening. At the old house, I had developed the habit of looking through the blinds whenever headlights slowed outside. I hadn't even realized I was doing it until I didn't have to anymore. Everything I used to pour into my parents and Derek began flowing back into our own life, We took the kids to a mountain cabin that summer and spent 4 days hiking badly marked trails, roasting marshmallows, and letting them stay awake far too late. I upgraded the home office where I ran my company, instead of buying Derek another emergency set of tires. Ryan finally started the online shop he had talked about for years, designing custom home pieces and holiday decorations, and I helped him build the website, connect payments, organize inventory, and automate shipping. There was something strangely satisfying about watching money and effort create happiness instead of resentment. For years, I had thought generosity meant saying yes whenever someone needed me. Now I was learning that generosity without boundaries was just another way of teaching people that access to me had no price. In July, on my birthday, a package appeared on our porch. No return address. Just my name and the new address written carefully across the front. That immediately told me someone had found us. Inside was an old photo album. I recognized it before I opened it because Mom used to keep dozens like it in the hall closet. Every page contained photographs from my childhood Christmas mornings, school plays, birthday parties, softball games, vacations. But someone had taken a thick black marker and covered Ryan's face in every photograph where he appeared. In newer pictures, my children had been scribbled over too. At the very back was a note written in Mom's handwriting. "You used to belong to us. Now you belong to him." I felt something cold crawl through me, not because the message worked, but because I suddenly understood how they saw love as ownership. Ryan looked through the album once without saying anything. Then he closed it, carried it outside, dropped it into the trash bin, came back inside, poured himself a glass of wine, and kissed my forehead. "You okay?" he asked. I surprised myself by saying yes and meaning it. That package was the last real attempt to provoke me for a while. Weeks passed, then months. The silence stopped feeling temporary. In September, Derek sent an email with only 2 words in the subject line. "Dad's sick." I stared at it for several minutes without opening the message. The old Claire would have clicked immediately. Called Mom, canceled plans, asked what hospital, offered money, started solving problems before anyone even asked. My hand hovered over the mouse, but all I could see was Derek smirking while Mom told me my children didn't belong at Christmas. I remembered the engraved watch disappearing from my trunk. I remembered Dad asking me to restart his rent payments without once asking how his grandchildren were doing. I remembered Mom telling strangers that Ryan had poisoned me against the family while using my name to redirect unpaid rent. There had been so many moments when any of them could have chosen kindness. They hadn't. I deleted the email. 2 weeks later, Ryan and I took the kids to the coast for the weekend. They spent hours chasing waves, screaming every time the water reached their ankles, then building a crooked sandcastle they insisted was a fortress. That evening, we sat outside a little seafood place while the sun dropped behind the water. I watched Ryan cut our youngest child's food, while our oldest tried to explain why her sandcastle needed another tower, and something in me finally settled. "I'm done for good," I said. Ryan looked at me, but he didn't ask what I meant. He already knew. What had happened wasn't really me cutting ties with my family. It was me, refusing to keep bleeding for people who kept holding the knife and then complaining that I was making a mess. 3 months after the move, our days had become almost boring, and I mean that as the highest compliment possible. No surprise visits, no strange letters, no relatives calling to negotiate on Mom's behalf, no fake emergencies from Derek. I woke up, made coffee, packed lunches, and walked the kids to the bus stop with Ryan. We slept better, we laughed more, even our youngest seemed different. During the worst months of the conflict, she had started waking at night and crawling into our bed without being able to explain why. After we moved, she slowly started sleeping through again. Children notice tension even when adults think they're hiding it. Looking at her now made me realize how much emotional noise had been filling our old house. Ryan's shop took off faster than either of us expected. His custom holiday collection started getting shared online, and the winter pre-orders surpassed everything he had projected for the entire first year. I handled the technical side whenever my own work allowed it. Website updates, inventory tracking, payment systems, little pieces of automation that saved him hours. It was the first time we had truly built something together, and I loved watching him realize that something he once treated like a hobby could become his own successful business. My company kept growing too. The previous quarter became the strongest one I had ever had. For once, I celebrated instead of wondering which relative would suddenly discover an emergency if they knew the number. I even bought myself something I had wanted for years, a beautiful guitar I used to stare at online when my business was barely surviving and every extra dollar had a destination before it reached my account. When it arrived, I felt almost guilty opening the case. Ryan leaned against the doorway and laughed at my expression. "You realize you could afford 10 of those, right?" I smiled. I only wanted one. That was another thing I was learning. Having money didn't mean I owed everyone else access to it. I could buy something simply because it meant something to me. I could save. I could travel with my kids. I could help Ryan build his dream. None of those decisions required approval from people who had spent years mocking me for supposedly having nothing. By autumn, our oldest had made a best friend at school. Our youngest had started talking about the new house, as if she had lived there forever. One night, we carved pumpkins at the kitchen table while music played, and Ryan burned one of those aggressively cinnamon-scented candles that somehow made the entire house smell like pie. Pumpkin seeds were everywhere. The kids were arguing about whose jack-o'-lantern looked scarier. Ryan had orange pulp stuck to his sleeve. I looked around and waited for the familiar anxiety that used to accompany every holiday, the question of whose house we were expected to visit, who would make a comment, whether Derek would insult me and Mom would call it a joke, whether I would end another evening sitting in the car, wondering why I kept putting myself through it. Nothing came. There was only the sound of my children laughing. I used to think I would eventually miss my parents so much that I would crawl back and accept whatever version of an apology they offered. I thought family absence would feel like a permanent wound. Instead, what I missed was the family I had imagined they might someday become, not the people they actually were. The truth was that I finally belonged to a family now, not because Ryan owned me, despite what Mom's note claimed, and not because I had replaced one group with another. I belonged because nobody in this house required me to earn my seat at the table. My children didn't care what my company made. Ryan didn't love me more after seeing my bank balance. Nobody laughed when someone else was hurt. Nobody treated kindness like weakness. Sometimes I still think about that first phone call. "Your kids don't need to come to Christmas. It's adults only." Mom probably thought it was one sentence, one decision, one holiday. She had no idea she was pulling on the loose thread, holding years of denial together. If she hadn't excluded my children, maybe I would still be transferring $600 every month. Maybe Derek would still be calling whenever his car broke down. Maybe I would still be sitting at those dinners, smiling through insults because confronting them felt more frightening than enduring them. In a strange way, they gave me the one Christmas gift I never would have bought for myself: clarity. I don't know what happened with Dad after Derek's email. I don't know whether my parents eventually caught up on their rent or moved somewhere cheaper. I don't know whether Derek replaced his car or told everyone some version of the story where I was the villain. For the first time, I don't need to know. Their emergencies are no longer automatically my responsibilities. Their opinions are no longer instructions. Their disappointment doesn't decide what kind of daughter, mother, or partner I am. Every extra dollar, every free weekend, every ounce of energy I once spent trying to prove that I deserved a place in their family now goes toward the people who never asked me to prove it. Ryan, my children, myself. I spent years believing I was the supporting character in somebody else's story. The reliable daughter, the convenient sister, the quiet wallet, the backup plan. I'm not any of those things anymore. This life is mine now, and for the first time, it finally feels like it.